about her message. I think that as someone who is recently divorced and probably looking back and reflecting on her experience dating and getting married, she probably, and actually she said this, she regrets not marrying someone from Princeton. So I think that she was just trying to give some honest advice.
I think Susan Patton intended her advice to be benign, but I think the way it came across was an entirely contrived view of what it means to be a woman in college right now. Really, the crux of her argument from my perspective was that as a woman today, we have an unfair and undue responsibility to go husband hunting, which is a responsibility that, in her view, men don't have and don't need to worry about. So what really bothered me about Susan Patton's advice was her emphasis on women's responsibility to devote their college years to finding a spouse when she's explicitly said that she doesn't think this is important for her college-age son who goes to Princeton.
I don't think that she necessarily meant to say that it wasn't important for her son, and I don't think that she necessarily meant to put the onus on women. I think that the impetus for this article was a conversation she had with a group of females. So I think that that was one reason why she started talking to women, and she herself obviously is a woman, so I think that it makes it easier for her to relate to people of the same gender. And she did mention that she was thrilled that her oldest son had married a Princeton girl. So I think that she does value that from both sides of the gender divide.
But I mean, she's explicitly said that she has a son who's a junior at Princeton, and that he has a wealth of women that he can choose from. Women who are as smart as him, but also women who are not as smart as him. Women who go to Princeton and women who don't go to Princeton. And that ultimately this isn't important for him to focus on right now. Whereas being a Princeton woman in the same position, she thinks this is important and should be perhaps even more of a priority than focusing on career or academic prospects. And I mean, I just have serious doubts that what she said in her article about women not needing professional advice anymore is valid. I mean, I would love to have some professional advice from Susan Patton. She's an executive recruiter, and she's worked at Condé Nast, which is, I'd love to hear more about that. What I don't want to hear is marriage advice from someone who's not from my generation, from someone who doesn't view women's roles as progressive, and from someone who, frankly, did not have a good time in her marriage experience. Yeah.
Right. I think that given the fact that she was class president, given her amazing career accomplishments, and given the fact that she never said that it was more important, I don't know if that's a fair assumption to make.
But she has said that she sort of went against the grain when she was a student at Princeton by telling her fellow classmates that she was there because she wanted to find a husband and have children.
Right.
I mean, it's in her original article. She said she was part of this first class of women who got to go to Princeton and have this Ivy League experience, and unlike her classmates who were really excited about what that meant in terms of career opportunities, she was the one who said, I want to get married.
Right.
Yeah, and I think it's reassuring to think that it was controversial then, but it's certainly something that should be controversial now, that you would want to go to a place like Penn or Princeton or any university, not for the educational resources, but for the dating prospects.
Well, I don't think that just because that was her experience and what she wanted to get out of Princeton, I don't think that's what she's recommending to us to focus solely on, just because it was her sole focus. And I don't think she's saying that you should go to schools like Princeton or like Penn to find a man. She's just speaking to the girls who are already there.
That's true. I mean, and it's also not to say that places like Princeton or Penn don't have a wealth of marriageable people.
Right.
But I think what's important is to recognize that goes both ways. So, I mean, what I really liked about your piece is that you sort of you directed her argument in the sense of saying that we should be all just keeping our eyes open.
Right.
For people who are equally intellectual and curious and ambitious. And I think that's something that's a good takeaway from this piece, is that, we are at a place with a lot of smart and intelligent and fun, ambitious people who are all of marriage material, but that goes for men just as much as it does for women. So,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I think if Susan's advice is really going to be valid in today's world, she has to open that up to both men and women, saying that, if women need to look for a partner who's smart and ambitious, then so do men.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that. I think that she just meant to write to a more directed audience, namely the audience that she had spoken to in person previously that week, and, people of her same gender, and it might have been too broad to tell everyone at Princeton that. So I think that directing it at women made it a little more cohesive and relatable.
I mean, do you think if that sort of talk happened at Penn, that Penn women would direct the conversation in that direction? Or do you think Penn women would be more interested in hearing about legitimate career advice?
Well, I think that no matter who you're talking to, the personal details of someone's life are usually more interesting than the professional ones.
Yeah.
And, that's what really interests people. It's the gossip and the intimate details. So I think that might have been the case here at Penn also. But think about how many resources we have for learning about our careers, our job prospects, our futures, academics, and who do we have to guide us through the more relationship, interpersonal-based interactions that we have? I don't think that she had an elitist tone at all. I think that she could have very well written that same article to students at Northwestern or to a non-Ivy League school, but that was her alma mater. That was the group of students that she had spoken to prior to writing the article, and I think that was just a reference point for her. It is a place where there are so many smart people, and it is a great place to potentially find a husband, and I think she recognizes the value of that. There's nothing wrong with that.
I mean, I do think there's something problematic in saying that, as women, her exact quote is that as women, we've almost priced ourselves out of the market by being smart and going to a school with other smart men. So I think it's not just elitism, which is saying that to find a smart man, you have to go to a school like Princeton, Penn, when so many people know that it's really not the school you go to that makes you smart or intellectually curious or a valuable partner at all. But it's also this idea that women should have to find someone smarter than them. Not just as smart, but smarter. And so her comment about being priced out of the market really rubbed me the wrong way, insofar as it reinforced this idea that women should dumb themselves down in order to be attractive to a man. So, I mean, I've read some responses to her article which have said, having a Princeton degree or a Penn degree or an Ivy League degree is sometimes a little daunting to a man who doesn't go to Princeton or Penn, but it shouldn't be that way. And I think that to reinforce that idea by saying, you have to marry someone who's smarter than you so that a man can feel confident about himself is just completely ridiculous. There's nothing wrong with being a smart, ambitious, degree-holding woman and just being proud of that. And there's also nothing wrong with being the breadwinner as a woman.
No,
which is something that I think Susan Patton just really doesn't recognize. She seems to really cling to these traditional ideas of what a good marriage looks like, and truthfully, I mean, at least where I see it is that we're a generation of women who don't really care about being traditional, and what's the modern norm for a marriage is not necessarily what she's been advocating.
I think that her message was good, but her means of delivering it was a little flawed. I think she came off as being a little aggressive, and I did take issue with her tone. But I think that as a result of that, people really attacked her when the content of her message and her intentions were probably good. The one part of her article I did have a big problem with was the part about finding a man starting freshman year.
Right.
Because that implies that you cannot marry someone who's younger than you. But of course you can. My mom is 2 years older than my dad. I know couples where the man and the woman have a 10-year age difference. So that was a little jarring because I had really been in agreement with her throughout the heart of her article, and then in that last paragraph, it was a little surprising to see something that was just so incorrect.
Absolutely. And also I think another part of what made that so disturbing to me was that your freshman year should really be devoted to starting this husband hunt already. When I know my freshman year, I was so busy trying to get involved with clubs and trying to get a grasp on academics and trying to figure out how I could exist in this new college environment and situating myself to Philadelphia. I mean, to try and add finding a husband on that list when you're an 18-year-old kid is just, I think that's completely absurd.
It's ridiculous. It is ridiculous.
And also, I mean, something that Susan Patton has also been criticized for is sort of advocating young marriage when we know statistically that you're more likely to get divorced if you marry young.
Right.
You're more likely to have incongruent ideas of what your future life is like if you rush into a marriage.
Right.
And so this idea that as an 18-year-old you should be finding your husband already is it's just not practical.
Well, she never said anything about necessarily tying the knot right away.
True.
She said that you can find a husband, but that doesn't mean get married on graduation day. You can marry the person 10, 15 years after graduation. They just happen to be someone that you met while you were an undergrad.
Sure. Which is totally plausible. And I mean, I think it's very, very likely that a lot of us will meet our spouses at Penn. It's a great place, full of great people. I don't think that should be the priority by any means.
No, but I don't think she meant it to be. I don't think she meant it to be.
Well, something that Susan Patton said in her original article was that women have been receiving too much professional advice, and that is completely covered, and what women need to compensate for now is the relational aspect, which I think is a really strange view of how young women fit into the world today, which is that women still are not on the same level as men professionally, and I think it's much harder for women to enter a lot of fields than it is for men. And so to suggest that like your worth is still defined by your marriage status or your relationship suggests that that is the priority, and that it's not a priority to continue going into fields that are male dominated. It's more of a priority to get married. The biggest problem about Susan Patton's argument for me is that it's so gendered, and that if you want to make some kind of recommendation for students to, you know, marry other intellectual students or students with the same alma mater, like that's fine, but the fact that her advice is so gendered really, really bothered me. And the way she tried to defend that argument was by saying it's different for women because women have a biological clock and men don't. So you can be a 50-year-old man and very easily meet someone who is of childbearing age, but you can't be a 50-year-old woman and still plan to get married and have children at that age. Which for me just reinforces this idea that we all have to be traditional in the way that we marry and have children. Certainly it is the norm for people of our parents' age to marry an older husband and to have children before the age of 30. And I think biologically that does make sense. There are also a lot of other ways to have a family these days, and it's also not necessarily the case that everyone wants to have a family these days. So I think what Susan Patton did when she tried to defend her argument was just reinforce this idea that everyone wants to be traditional. And everyone doesn't. And honestly, if it was the case that I had to choose between having a natural, traditional childbearing and marriage experience or having an awesome career, I would rather freeze my eggs or do in vitro fertilization or adopt. Because it's important to me to have a career, and it's very, very possible to postpone those childbearing marriageable goals, I think.
Certainly a lot to respond to. I guess the biggest thing is that she probably felt like she needed to excuse the fact that she only wrote to women, and that's sort of a convenient way to do so.
Sure.
But I don't know if that was necessarily her primary motivation in writing that original article. I think that she had just spoken with a group of young women at Princeton, and after reflecting on that conversation and how it had gone, I think she probably had a little more that she wanted to say, which is why she wrote the letter to the editor. And then after receiving backlash for gendering it, I think she probably felt compelled to find some sort of excuse for that. But,
you know, I just think it's so odd, like, she wrote this piece of unsolicited advice to the women of Princeton about how they should navigate the relational world as a young person when she has a son who's our age, you know? And this isn't the advice she's giving to him, you know? I certainly don't want Susan Patton's advice. I wish she'd given it to her son instead of to me and the other women of Princeton, but...
Well, isn't all advice that columnists give unsolicited?
It is, but in most cases when it's good advice, it comes from someone who's sort of done it right, and Susan Patton is not that woman.
Well, I think that sometimes it's really helpful to hear from people who have made mistakes so that you can learn how to avoid their failures. And in another follow-up article of hers, she said that she did wish she had married someone at Princeton. And obviously, I don't know the details of her relationship, but I have a hunch that perhaps she felt that finding someone more intellectual or who had that common ground of a shared Ivy League experience, that could have been the glue to hold the relationship together.
But do you think marrying a Princetonian would have fixed those problems?
I can't say. I mean, I don't know really anything about her personal life or anything like that, but I do think that it is helpful to hear advice from people who have succeeded, but also from people who have failed and how they attribute those failures and why.
Susan Patton says, you might meet some smart men after you graduate, but you'll never be around this many smart men at once, which really suggests that women aren't going to be in career fields with smart people.
Right. I think that she definitely did not take into account the possibility of meeting people in your professional life, but I think that she was sort of just speaking about life in general and trying to date and enter the dating market, maybe as a young professional in New York City. Perhaps you're not looking within your professional circles, but rather just looking at the population at large. I mean, when you walk into a bar in Brooklyn, the average intelligence isn't going to be the same as when you walk into Van Pelt. So I think that she simply meant that it's a lot easier when you have such a wealth of intelligent people surrounding you and you're, within just a few blocks of you, compared to when you're out there in the real world and, everyone's interspersed.
But do you think it's easy to do that at this age? Because one of the critiques that I sort of like of Patton's piece is that even if women really do adhere to this advice and try to pursue sort of serious relationships or try and pick out a man they want to marry. It doesn't really seem like a lot of college men are prepared to do the same.
Absolutely.
And so there's sort of this incongruity between what she wants women to do and like what we can realistically expect men to do at age 21.
Right, exactly. And so many studies have showed that developmentally men are so many years behind women. They're getting married later. They're just not ready to take the same major steps when women are. So I think that was also a gap in her argument, and I addressed that in the beginning of my article. I said, even if I did want to find a husband, it's not like anyone around here is looking to find a wife, so... But still, you never know if you're dating someone what that could turn into.
Definitely.
No one's expecting you to get down on one knee junior year.
I think what's problematic about her giving advice to young women is that a lot of us are sort of confused about how to navigate the world of dating and relationships, and a lot of us are confused about where our priorities should lie. And so she does have great influence in that sense. I just don't think this is good advice to be giving. She packages these ideas in a very benign way, and I don't think she meant to be as provocative or controversial as she ended up being at all. But that's actually part of the problem for me, is that it's so innocuous when you take it at face value, which is that she just wants women to be happy, and just to be happy you should just find a man, and something about that is just problematic to suggest that that's what we should be wanting, when for a lot of women it's so taboo and controversial to pursue an alternative.
I think that when you write an article like that, you realize that you're not speaking to everyone. You're speaking to the people who are willing to listen and who want to take your advice. So I don't think that she necessarily meant to suggest a panacea for all undergraduate women.
But even then, it's like, I feel like I'm someone who would like to have a family and a husband and a career. And there are so many ways to do that without trying to tie the knot at a young age.